In the last lesson, we looked at types of governments. Today, we're going to look at American government. If you've ever been asked what type of government does America have, the correct answer is going to be America is a constitutional, democratic republic. And that's a mouthful, especially most Americans think that American government is just a democracy. But we're going to go through each one of these words and understand what they mean and how they work in American government. So the first word, constitutional. Constitutional is coming from the word constitution. We're establishing up front that America is not ruled by man, but ruled by laws. Our laws are written down and they are followed. So the Constitution lays out the government and the laws of the land. Whenever new laws are made, they are compared to the Constitution. We're going to have an entire lesson on the Constitution. So the takeaway here is that America is a country ruled by laws, not by man. Most people know that America is a democracy, but what does that mean exactly? So a democracy is where the government is run by the people, not a single person or a group, but by all the people, usually through voting, and laws are made by majority rule. In a democracy, each individual has a vote and a say in government. America was not the first democracy. Athens, Greece, in the 5th century had a flourishing democracy where all the male citizens would come together in forums and they would discuss and vote on laws. The idea of voting and the people participating in government is going to get a new life in the 17th and 18th century during the Enlightenment, especially with the ideas of a man named John Locke. And then for American government, Thomas Jefferson, who wrote the Declaration of Independence, is going to look to Locke and be heavily interested in him, and we'll see a lot of his influence. So during the Enlightenment, there's this idea of a social contract. Now, what is a social contract? It says that the government gets its power from the people, and the idea of a social contract applies to just contracts in general. So we're used to contracts. If you sign a contract, you agree to do something, say mow the grass. I will pay you $10, and if you don't fulfill that contract to mow the grass, I don't have to pay you. So the social contract says that the government is in a contract with the people, and if the government doesn't do its job or doesn't fulfill that contract, the people have the right to revolt, or they can have a revolution and replace that government. And John Locke's idea of replacing that government is what influenced Thomas Jefferson. And so when Thomas Jefferson writes in the Declaration of Independence, men deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that when any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and institute new government. So we can see right away, in the very beginning establishing American government, we have this idea of the social contract, that the power comes from the people, and if the government doesn't fulfill that, we can remove it and establish new government. John Locke also has something called the natural rights, and we're going to look at that again because those are something that Americans are going to put into government. But let's look at democracy. What do you need to think about when you think about democracy? People. So, like Abraham Lincoln said, government of the people, by the people, for the people. How does it work? So in a democracy, people come together and they vote on laws. It's important to understand that in a democracy, laws are decided by majority rule. In a democracy, if 51% of the people want to raise taxes, taxes get raised. But in good government, it can't just be for the majority. It has to take into consideration the minority. One, because the majority is not always right. Think of the 1960s when the majority of Southerners did not support civil rights. So the Founding Fathers understood that majority rule is not always right rule, and they actually feared the majority rule and that it could turn into mob rule. So what did the Founders do to protect against mob rule? They created, our last word, a republic. So think about the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands. Not a democracy. Nowhere in the Constitution are you actually going to see the words democracy. The founders knew full well the difference between a republic and a democracy, and they repeatedly and emphatically said that they had founded a republic. So let's look at what that is. In a republic, laws are still created by voting. However, the majority rule is restrained, and the focus of a republic becomes to protect individual rights. So you remember John Locke, who Thomas Jefferson liked for his ideas on the social contract. Well, he also is going to like his ideas on rights. When you come into the world, you are born into this world free. You automatically have freedom and liberty, and John Locke says property, and you can think of property as in labor. You have the ability to create something when you're born. So these things are only things that the government can take away, right? You're born with life, the government can take that away. You're born with liberty, the government can take it away. You are born with the ability to create and to work, but the government can take that away. So these are your rights, and these are things as Locke would call them your natural rights. And Thomas Jefferson, again, is going to use this idea in the Declaration of Independence when he says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So Jefferson changes it a little bit, but he has this understanding that government needs to protect these rights. So a republic protects individual rights in three ways. One, it's going to follow written laws, which we've already looked at in the Constitution. But a republic is also not a direct democracy. It's what's called a representative or an indirect democracy. In a pure democracy, every citizen is voting. But in a republic, the people do not vote directly on laws. Instead, the people vote for a person, and that person represents them. Those people who vote on the laws on your behalf, right? Like you don't go every time there's a law that needs to be passed, you don't have to run down to City Hall and vote on it, or go to Washington and vote on it. So you vote for senators and congressmen, and these people make the laws and they represent you. By allowing someone else to vote, that puts a buffer between you and your individual rights and the masses and the majority rule. So the Founding Fathers believed that the masses would hopefully elect someone who was informed and educated and understood the law and had a better handle on the issue than, say, the majority, and that they would take into consideration individual rights and protect those rights. So when you see a republic, you can insert representative democracy. And this is very practical now. If we had to stop our lives every time there was something that needed to be voted on, we'd never get anything done. So the Founding Fathers wanted people to vote for the best person for the job. Now this can sound a little elitist, and like the founders wanted a small, educated upper class to dictate to the masses. Maybe. But do you know all the details about trade and the economy and running the country? I don't. So this is why we vote for someone who understands the issues but still represents you. So the takeaway here is when you think of a republic, think representative democracy, and it's the idea to get the best man for the job who can guard and protect your individual rights. Now that you know what all three terms mean, in a constitutional democratic republic, the role of the citizens is very important. This idea that the people hold the power through voting for representatives is an active process. People must be involved for a democracy to work. If people sit back and do nothing, the system's going to fail. The process only works when people stay educated about the issues and then vote. A lot of people think that voting doesn't matter, but what happens when you don't vote? You're giving up that idea that the government gets its power from you. If people stop participating in that system, the number of people controlling the government becomes smaller and smaller. And suddenly, before you know it, your rights are taken away because you didn't care enough to protect them. And then the government has the power and not the people. So voting is extremely important. You might think that your voice doesn't get heard when you vote. You are one person among millions. I want you to think about the presidential election of 2000. The presidential election of 2000 hinged on the outcome of one state, Florida. First, the television network said that the vice president, Al Gore, had carried Florida. Then the state's election considered it too close to call. Then the networks declared Texas Governor George W. Bush the winner. The presidential election was so close that it took 5 weeks to determine the winner. When it came down to it, he won by 537 votes. 537 votes. So if more people had voted, the election could have been very, very different. So your vote does matter.